Everybody call me Uncle Shelby.
Hi, I'm Tyler Braun. I'm sitting down here in Phoenix, Arizona with Mr. Shelby Yastrow. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Shelby.
Thank you, Tyler. I was born in a small town in Illinois called Kewanee, Illinois, and went to Kewanee High School, then on to Northwestern University, north of Chicago, and then Northwestern University Law School. And I graduated from Northwestern Law 1959, and I went to work for a large firm in Chicago, law firm. In those days, a large firm was 35 lawyers. Now, that's not even mid-size.
Right.
And by the sheerest of coincidences, I was there 1 week, the youngest person there, which meant every day I go to traffic court and that kind of thing. And a gentleman walked in off the street without an appointment, looking for a lawyer for a new business he was starting. And the receptionist introduced him to one of the partners, who asked him his name and what he does. And he said his name was Ray Kroc, and he was about to start a company to sell 15-cent hamburgers, which of course was McDonald's. Since this was kind of a silk stocking firm.
Yeah.
And in the 50s, drive-thrus and drive-ins were kind of like pool halls. They didn't know they wanted to bother with this business. And I was walking down the hall, and this partner saw me, and he didn't even know my name. I just started, a young man, come in here and meet Mr. Kroc. And Mr. Kroc, he's going to do your legal work for you. And of course, there were some things I couldn't do, and other people did, but I was kind of his guy. And he got involved in a seemingly minor lawsuit in Peoria, Illinois, with a franchisee, and 3 franchisees. And we hired a law firm in Peoria. I worked on the case closely, and it just wouldn't stop, that case, with appeals, and it ended up as an antitrust case in the federal courts. And I was this young punk working on the case, and I was having senior partners work on it because there were things I didn't know in those days. But Ray liked me, and we came out okay on that. He offered me a job in '62. The law firm persuaded me not to take the job, telling me that I was going to be a partner in another year or two, and that we all knew that this guy was a flake and he would never make it, and this company was destined for failure, because at the meantime it was becoming popular, and the concept. And Burger King was now starting with General Foods and Burger Chef and Hardee's, and who thought that Ray Kroc could compete in those leagues, since his past experience was play the piano in a bar and sold milkshake machines. So I turned him down.
Yeah, that was in '62? In
'62. And he said, I thought you were smarter than that, Cy. He always called me Cy because my initials were S-Y. And the following year, I resigned from the firm and started my own practice in Waukegan, Illinois, 4 or 5 of us. And it was totally different, a small town, a small county. We didn't do securities work or public corporations and things. But 15 years after I was in Waukegan, and we were doing fine, my partners and I, Ray called me. And he said, did you ever regret turning me down 15 years ago? Well, by now McDonald's was a behemoth global entity.
In only 15 years?
Oh yeah, 15 years we went from 500 or 1,000 stores up to 10 or 12,000 stores.
Wow.
And international. And so he asked if I ever regretted it, and I said, every day of my life.
Wow.
He says, well then get your butt down there to McDonald's. I want you here. Could you be here in a month?
Yeah.
I said, yes. I called my partners in, It's all yours, I'm leaving. They thought I was crazy. My wife thought I was crazy. My mother thought I was nuts. My whole family, you know, why would you give up your own business to go to work for somebody?
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what my salary or title was going to be. But I knew Ray Kroc. And by this time, I felt that I had proven to myself, at least, that I was a pretty good lawyer. But I was like in the minor leagues up in Waukegan. You know, a big merger for me was a guy bought a barber shop.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see how I do in the big leagues. So I took the job, went down there, and my first job was vice president and chief counsel of litigation. I handle all the litigation worldwide. And then 3 or 4 years later, that was 78. 3 years later, I became general counsel. So all the law divisions reported to me. Licensing, real estate law, securities tax, the whole thing. And then I inherited 8 other departments as we were going through.
And about what year was this?
Well, I went there in 78, and in 81 I became general counsel. Then in 1990, my predecessor left, and they gave me about 9 other departments besides law as a reporting officer. And I was in the senior executive management team, so there were like 6 or 7 of us who really were at the top of the company. It was fun. It was a good gig. It was a big jump from Waukegan and from Kewanee, where I grew up. But I never looked back, and it was good.
Yeah.
I miss it. I miss it. But yeah, I reached a point in my life when I better retire. I was getting older, and still wanted to play a lot of golf and fish and travel, and I didn't want to die at my desk. So
Yeah.
And it worked out fine. They took good care of us, and we were able to have a nice life for us and our kids and grandkids.
That's great. And here you are right on the golf course.
Well, yeah, I am.
But you're not fully retired. You still do. You're still in the game, so to speak.
Well,
in some
it's
ways.
an interesting thing. I should give a course in retirement. I think I flunked it first.
Oh.
People who are working hard, I mean, if they have a challenging job, I find it's very hard to stop. All of a sudden, you don't feel important anymore. Nobody's depending on you. You're not making important decisions. You can't just read the newspaper and do crossword puzzles. But fortunately, when I retired from McDonald's, I had, I think, 3 or 4 board of directors positions. And then I became of counsel with a law firm, meaning I'm not really there, but I have an office, and I can work on certain cases. So it gives you a softer landing.
Okay.
So I did that with a firm in Chicago and then with a firm out here in Phoenix. And I've served on 3 boards of directors that have New York Stock Exchange, publicly held companies. And then Great Clips, which is a national franchising chain, largest hair salon brand in the world, about 5,000 outlets now, growing 1 a day.
1 salon a day?
About 1 salon a day they growing. Yeah, maybe if you don't count Sundays. Okay. I think it's about 300 a year.
That's amazing.
And it's a very well run, even though it's privately held company. And I'm able to bring to them not only my legal experience, but my franchising experience. And it's interesting because when they just were starting, and they asked me to come up, I said, why would I bother with a small little startup company like this? I'm an executive at McDonald's. But then it dawned on me that about once a day, if not 2 or 3 times a week, at McDonald's, we would say, gee, we should have done this differently 35 years ago. When we started, we should have put this clause in the franchise agreement, or we should have had our regional boundaries differently, or our advertising co-op should be structured differently. Well, here McDonald's was there. It was hard to change because we had 20-year franchise agreements, so you couldn't very well change them. But now I'm going to a company, it's like a mulligan starting over. I know what to do the first time, you know?
Yeah.
And So McDonald's, of course, survived grandly, but they went through a lot of trial and error that subsequent franchising companies have not done, whether it's food, fast food, or storm doors or whatever.
Okay.
Franchising is tricky, and it's a concept that very few people fully understand. Until the 1950s, there was no such thing.
Well, you said earlier to me that you couldn't even find franchising in the dictionary in its current, the way we currently understand it.
That's correct. The only company that used the term, as I recall, was Howard Johnson's Restaurants and Motels.
Okay.
And you probably don't even remember them. And,
I can't say I do.
But in fact, franchising is just another word for licensing.
Okay.
And the McDonald's franchise agreement really says license agreement. And the licensee and licensor. But we call it franchising. And never bothered to change the agreements. But now they all call them franchising. Oh, okay. Yeah, when I started, a franchise meant it was a right given by a state or government to operate a utility or a railroad.
Oh, I see. But
it had nothing to do with business until Howard Johnson's and then McDonald's. Then Midas Muffler got in early in that. And now the International Franchise Association has about 5,000 members, maybe more. Yeah, franchising is a relatively new business term. Some people call them distributors, some call them licensees. But by and large, it's the concept where people with the know-how, but who might not have the capital, find people with the capital who don't have the know-how, and say, if you put up the money and build this restaurant, we'll teach you how to run it. So it's a marriage of skill and capital. And we find that in distributorships too. So basically the franchisees put up the money for their outlet, and the franchisors teach them how to do it and supply the marketing. And one thing I should say, if it doesn't belabor this, franchising is so broad a term that it covers a continuum. On the one extreme is, let's say, Florsheim shoes, where you'll see Florsheim shoe stores. And a store in a specific town will have a franchise. That means they could put up the sign and sell Florsheim shoes. Okay. That's all it means. They could sell Buster Browns and other shoes in competition. Florsheim doesn't do anything to them but sell them shoes and give them a sign. On the other extreme, I'd say, is McDonald's, where the franchisee does very little. Well, let me change it. It does a lot. The franchisor requires that the franchisee not sell competitive products. Okay. So whereas a shoe store may, Florsheim, a McDonald's franchisee may not sell Burger King restaurants, hamburgers. In fact, we must sell only the products that McDonald's specifies. We must buy them from recommended specified suppliers. And McDonald's, they must wear uniforms. Mm-hmm. They must advertise a certain way. They must use the logo, the trademarks a certain way. We tell them how much change to put in the cash register every morning, how to lock up at night for security, how to pay deposits. So in other words, McDonald's does A to Z for the franchisee, whereas Florsheim just gives them a sign. Yeah. But also, they don't pay a royalty to Florsheim. They pay a royalty to McDonald's, a percentage of sales. Wow. And unlike most franchisors, McDonald's owns the real estate. So they also pay us rent. We put up the building and improve it. Okay. So they have a lease and a franchise. Wow. That's why all the McDonald's kind of seem like they're so solidified. It seems like they're all. It would be hard for a person to tell that they're all sort of independently run by the franchisee. That's the point, and that's the balance, and that's the trick. Mm-hmm. We want our franchisees to be entrepreneurial, and we can look at two different restaurants and tell which one is run better than the other one. And we could see differences, subtle differences in the way the training and decor is. But the goal of the restaurant is, of all franchise systems is consistency. So if you walk into a McDonald's restaurant in Tokyo or Bangkok, the Big Mac is going to taste like the one here in Phoenix.
That's amazing.
And there are no differences in the food or the menu worth mentioning. There's slight changes around the world, like the Philippines will serve a side of spaghetti because it's a very normal thing there.
Yeah.
And you might get a little rice in Japan or China. But by and large, the menu is the same. You get beer in Belgium or Germany, not here in the States. But it's the same food. And the only difference I mentioned, in India, you may not eat beef because cows are sacred in India. So there we use mutton, lamb.
Okay.
And people jokingly call it the Big Mac. But basically, it looks the same, it feels the same. Cleanliness is a big deal wherever you go, value. And we inspect the restaurants regularly. We have field men out there to make sure that their quality service and cleanliness is up to par. Checking the bathrooms, the filters on the roof, everything. It's very tight. There's not a lot of room for variation to the public eye.
Yeah, it sure seems like it. You always have the same experience. You know, I could eat at McDonald's 100 times and it would be the same thing with no problems. Well, for the
It's
most
supposed
part.
to be.
Yeah.
It's funny, the operations people can pick up little differences.
Uh-huh.
Not so much in the taste of the food, because that's pretty standard, unless a franchisee is doing a terrible job of keeping it fresh. But we're on that constantly. But they'll see little differences in, the furniture might not be as neatly placed. You know, the chairs gets kind of strewn around in certain restaurants.
Yeah.
Or the help might be a little messier looking, you know, some places and others. Or uniforms might not be as spick and span and things like that. But friendliness is important, you know. We've done tests. We've shown that just saying good morning and smiling
Really?
helps so much, give customers a feeling of being welcome.
Yeah.
And we enforce those things strictly.
So I'd like to talk more about your experience inside with McDonald's. What would you say were some of your greatest challenges, greatest successes?
Well, a lot of the great successes of lawyers lies in the avoidance of problems rather than the solving of problems.
Of course. So you never get the credit.
A great lawyer who never wins a lawsuit but never loses a lawsuit has done a pretty good job of avoiding lawsuits. But we couldn't. We had, right now, there's, I think, 68 million people a day eat at McDonald's. That's more than the population of England or France every day. And when I was there, it was about 40 million people a day before I retired. And I used to say, if something could go wrong 1 in a million times, it happened 40 times a day at McDonald's, because the numbers are so vast. And so we got all sorts of problems. Fortunately, our accident rate was very, very minor, and very minor accidents. People might slip and fall on a newly polished floor, but we weren't doing things that killed people or caused them to lose a limb or be crippled. Everybody, of course, remembers the famous case, which was on my watch, where the lady spilled hot coffee on her lap.
I've heard of that.
And that made me tort king in America for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But it did help us in the long run, because it brought attention to frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah.
It wasn't so frivolous. She won almost $3 million, but we got it thrown out of court later. And worked out
Did you oversee that one? Did you oversee that one?
I oversaw it to the extent that I heard about it the day after the verdict was in.
Oh.
But then I had to deal with the aftermath, because we had 800 cases filed. I'll call them copycat cases.
Okay.
In the following month.
Wow.
People say, hey, that's a good way to get rich. So they'll go in and say, I burned myself in the hot coffee, or my child got you know, we've had one case where a woman poured hot coffee or hot water or something on her child, got a burn, and her sister tipped us off. And we get a lot of fraudulent claims too. You know, but that's part of the game, and we're pretty good at catching them and avoiding them.
Yeah.
But we had, I mean, crazy lawsuits. But my bigger challenges weren't those. My bigger challenges was, for example, trying to do business in South Africa when the apartheid ended and all the Western companies wanted to do business down there. And it was a great site for English-speaking companies because they speak English. It's quite Western. Some trademark thieves have stolen our trademarks down there and registered them under their names. Names such as Big Mac, Quarter Pounder, Ronald McDonald, Golden Arches. So we had to go to court down there and had a lawsuit against these pirates, trademark pirates, and who were in a competitive business. And we eventually won it, but it was a long case. And it's kind of fun in a way, scary in another way, for me to handle litigation in foreign countries because their laws are different. I mean, not only the laws, but the procedures and what you call things. I mean, I worked on a case in London where all the lawyers wore wigs, and that was a long case. In fact, the longest case in the history of the United Kingdom. And so it was a big learning experience for me because procedures vary a little bit from state to state in the United States, but from country to country, you know, you have, for example, in South Africa, it's a combination between English and Dutch law, because the first settlers down there were from Holland. And of course, I tried cases in Brussels, in the United Kingdom, the European Union courts, and I was in courthouses in Sydney, Australia, and Tokyo, and Tel Aviv, and all over. Yeah. Even in New York, which is like a foreign country to me.
Really, that must be interesting to have to play by their rules anywhere you go. And
well, it is, but you know, the one thing that's pretty common throughout the world in the law business is that the law reflects social mores. And I always said that anything that is politically wrong cannot be legally right. And I always tell the lawyers who work for me, we had a lot of them at McDonald's, use the smell bad test. Just look at a situation. Or explain it to your husband or wife and say who should win. And that opinion will probably be correct because some conduct is tolerable and some isn't, and a layperson can tell. I mean, now I'm not talking about internal revenue, little or patent work, some of that real tough stuff, but when you say somebody did this to somebody else, if it sounds wrong, it probably is. And so although the procedures are different, the outcomes are pretty much the same. Suffice it to say that the United States is far and away the most litigious country in the world. And we have cases here that wouldn't even be considered in other jurisdictions. They'd be thrown out of court in a minute. But we have a different system here. We allow juries as a matter of right. In England, we had cases where one side would ask for a jury trial. The court would say, no, this isn't appropriate for a jury trial. Maybe it's too complicated, or maybe there's too much emotion or sympathy that will cause a sympathetic verdict instead of a legal verdict. But we don't have that. And we all say the right to trial by jury comes from the English law, but that's not true. Because under the English common law, there's only an absolute right to trial in a criminal case, not a civil. We apply that to civil cases. And we have contingent fees, which encourage lawyers to take these crazy cases and get before a sympathetic jury. And yeah, I mean, there was a case where a jury brought back $1 billion verdict against one of the car companies because of a bad paint job one time. So, you know, you can't always trust the jury system.
Wow, yeah, that's a little on the absurd side.
But it was a good gig. Practicing law at McDonald's was better than it would be for most companies. Because, and this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't know about if you weren't in the game, the McDonald's executives were extremely respectful of my position. And if I said, you really can't do this, or you really have to do it this way or that way, fine. Most executives in most companies, in fact, most people, resent lawyers saying you can't do this or you got to do it a certain way. You know, lawyers are looked at as speed bumps in the road instead of as hindrances instead of aids. But McDonald's was really good at it. And it made my life not only easier, but I was more successful that way because I didn't have to battle. And I know a lot of lawyers just won't give an advice that their bosses don't want to hear.
Yeah, right.
But you got to. That was the hard part of my job, to tell the chairman of the company, great idea, Fred, but you know.
Yeah, you got to say it how it is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why are you really there?
That's exactly true. One of the most important cases we ever had was in France, trying to close down all the restaurants. That was a big deal. That was a big case.
Really?
Took 10 months.
So how did that go along? Did France just decide they weren't going to have McDonald's anymore?
No. What happened, we gave a franchise to an American citizen who had French relatives background to open restaurants in Paris. And it was what we call a developmental franchise. Developmental franchises are less controlled than the normal franchise. You know. The developmental franchisee will go out and find his own real estate, and we have to approve it, but we don't have to find it for him. And he can sometimes sub-franchise, although that was an issue in the case in France. Yeah. But what happened is the French market was so tremendous that this particular franchisee had 14 stores open in Paris, France, and he had an exclusive running up to Normandy, that corridor, and he was running terrible restaurants. They were not as clean as we wanted. The food was held too long, it wasn't as fresh. The restaurants weren't, as far as we were, not clean enough. We were very, very meticulous on clean. Ray Kroc used to carry a broom in his car, and he'd see restaurants, he'd sweep them out.
Himself?
Yeah. So we brought a lawsuit. We finally said, you've got to clean up these stores and meet our specs on quality and speed of service and everything, or we're going to cancel the franchise. And it's a long story, but in France, under French law, parties to lawsuits are not allowed to testify, nor can their employees, because they're deemed to be biased. So you have to have independent witnesses. So you try to stipulate or agree on the facts. If you can't, you appoint something called huissiers, which is witness in French, to find facts, and they testify or file documents. Okay. And we had professional huissiers do the photography, and we showed pictures of all the restaurants and how dirty they were and everything. Mm-hmm. And then we had court-appointed huissiers come in and do inspections for bacteria and cleanliness. And so it was a long case, and punctuated by the fact that at the last minute, the other side turned up with photographs that contradicted ours. Oh. And we knew they were phony, and we actually ended up proving they were phony. Really? They were fraudulent photographs.
How did you do that?
Well, it was very interesting. The photograph, the guy was required to clean up his stores by, we call them stores, restaurants, by September 1st of 1979, I think it was, or 80. And we went in on September 1st with all these photographers. And then at the trial, he came out with pictures, said they were taken the same day, and they They were immaculate. Ours showed dirt and this and that,
Yeah.
dirty bathrooms. His, you could eat it off the floor, you know. So we knew couldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So we said to the judge, if they were taken recently, they wouldn't be admissible, because the question was, what were the stores on September 1st, 1980? Mm-hmm. And they said these pictures were taken August 29th. You know, we knew that couldn't be true. So it was a Friday, and we said, Your Honor, could we have a recess over the weekend to study these? Mm-hmm. And we had teams of experts with microscopes looking at these pictures, trying to see license numbers, to see what. Oh, and by the way, the restaurants, the views were the same as in our photographs. Okay. Even with one of them, there was a restaurant was under construction with the cones and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And we knew they were phony, and we inspected license plate number. You can see a theater in the background with a marquee. We were calling France. When did you show that movie? You know.
Yeah.
And we couldn't nail it down, but we knew there was something there. And about Sunday afternoon, we were sweating. One of my paralegals was looking at it. She said, "Oh my God, look at this." What? You know, sometimes when you look for the little things, you don't look for the big things. In our restaurants taken on September 1st, the background showed these big trees all fully bloomed with leaves. Okay. And on theirs, supposedly taken 2 days before, the trees were bare.
Oh.
And all the people were wearing windbreakers and jackets. So we knew it was taken in the winter months.
Well, they must have put the leaves back on.
So when we brought that out in court, and in kind of a cute little way, we had one of the younger lawyers say, "Gee, how come?" You know, the judge almost exploded. And we won the case, and we acquired all those restaurants back, canceled them, and got our legal fees paid. And thereafter, I talked to the judge. I happened to meet him socially. And he told me, he said, "You guys might have lost that case until I saw those pictures." Wow. It was a Perry Mason moment. You know?
Yeah.
And that's true in most lawsuits. There's a magic moment, and it was fun. That was one of the greatest. In fact, I have pictures here in the house showing those two views. I'll show you.
Right.
But that happens a lot in cases, but this was the most dramatic I think I ever had.
That could have made a funny movie or documentary.
Oh yeah, it's like at Perry Mason, you know, somebody admitting on the witness stand, "Okay, I did it."
Yeah.
But yeah, the lawsuits, as I say, were varied from slip and fall to. I never got involved in those. For the injury cases, we had paralegals and outside. We were self-insured, but we had outside law firms do it. But if it were what we call a sensitive case, if a child got hurt on the playground or playland, or a person complained of illness from eating, or a foreign object, we were all over that. I mean, that's our wheelhouse. You know, we can't let that. And fortunately, all the years we were there, I won't say we avoided the bullets because there weren't any. It's the most immaculately controlled place to eat in the world. Well, you can't. In my 20 years there, working there, and 35 years if you consider the time before that.
Yeah.
Can't remember anybody getting sick in a restaurant or a breakout, whereas you hear about other places with E. coli and mad cow and all that. So,
yeah.
In fact, the United States Department of Agriculture would send their inspectors to our places to learn how to inspect and prepare meat.
Oh, no way.
So they could check other places, yeah. Yes. But in every supplier we had, there were teams of McDonald's people there watching them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was good.
So after all this you're telling me about it, it sounds like quite a busy career with a lot of responsibility. How did you, first off, how did you know that you were ready to retire? And how did you take the steps into that?
Well, it's a long story. Nobody knows when they're ready to retire, but most people wait too long.
Yeah.
My parents died relatively young. And I'm an active guy, as you might tell, and I love to play golf. I love to fish. I like to travel socially, not so much for business, and hike and things. And it's hard to do that when you're practicing law in a major corporation. You can't do it halfway. You can't work 3 days a week. You got to grind it out. So in early 1997, I told the chairman that I wanted this to be my last year. It wasn't a 2 weeks notice thing or anything. It was 12 months. And I just come back from African safari, and I was dreaming about the company all the time down there. And I said, "It's time for me to retire if I can't even enjoy a vacation."
Yeah.
So he asked me if I'd stay the year and do a few things and be responsible for hiring a successor, which I did. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the year, we retired and moved to Arizona from Chicago area. And fortunately for me, I was on 3 corporate boards, and I did some charity work. So I had something to do. But more to the point, and this will sound strange after what I've been saying, working at McDonald's was much easier than working in my own law firm because I had staff. And in my own law firm, I'd meet with clients all day or be in courthouse all day, and I'd come home. Then I'd have to draft the wills and the contracts and read the leases and the other documents at night. At McDonald's, I had a lot of people. We had over 100 lawyers working there. So I didn't have to do all that stuff. I had people to do it. Mm-hmm. And I find myself, what am I going to do tonight? What am I going to do this weekend? You know, and although at the office I was busy. So everybody thinks that somewhere within them is a book. And I always thought that, but I didn't have a subject. And one day, I was still at McDonald's in 1985 or 86, 87. I was in New York meeting with the advertising agencies, and a question came up over dinner. "Can I ask you a question about wills? Do you know anything about wills?" I said, "Yeah, I do. I wasn't a corporate lawyer all my life." Mm-hmm. And the woman gave me her problem, a family problem. And as is my wont, I over-explain sometimes. And I got into the explanation. I said, "In fact, I once had a case, da-da-da-da-da-da." And I told her, she said, "Oh, that would make an interesting novel." I said, "You think so?" That night at the hotel in New York, I started writing it with a longhand. Then I learned how to use a computer. I didn't use a computer before. Yeah. And that became my first book, which I'm happy to say reached number 7 on the Chicago Tribune national bestseller list.
Wow, first book.
Undue Influence. And then I wrote another book. Then I was commissioned to write a nonfiction. Then I wrote another. My 3 novels are about lawsuits, but civil cases. Mm-hmm. I leave John Grisham and Scott Turow to write about the murders and the bank heists. Yeah. And I write more about the civil cases. One was a will contest, one was a medical malpractice, and my third one is defamation of character that came out last May. And keeps me off the streets, out of the pool halls.
Yeah, right.
And then we have a growing big family. We have 3 children, my wife and I. We've been married 62 years now. And we have 3 children. But back in 1971, when we were living in Chicago, we brought a girl into our house from San Salvador. And she didn't speak a word of English. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of an exchange student thing, but she wasn't a student. She was working. She just came up to learn a little English. And to make a long story short, she was supposed to stay with us 2 weeks, and she stayed 12 years.
Wow.
We put her through high school, private high school, college, and she's still here. She's adopted, for all intents and purposes. No way. Married a wonderful Yankee. Has 4 sons. And they're part of our family. We travel every year together, all of us. We were just down in Captive Island. Yeah. And her 4 boys, I figure if I had ever done anything well, we've given a life to this young lady and her 4 boys, and I'm so proud of them. One's an airplane pilot for United, and one is graduating. We're going out to his graduation in May, the U.S. Naval Academy, where he's on the varsity gymnastics team. So I'm looking for, so we have a good family, and everybody loves everybody. All the cousins are close, and we text all day and communicate on FaceTime and all that. So it's fun. Yeah. And I feel sorry for people who don't have close families. They don't mean as much to you until you get older. Mm-hmm. Then you got somebody to take care of you.
Yeah, gotcha. It must be interesting to watch all of them, develop in their lives and move forward.
Yeah, and no lawyers.
Not a single one in the family.
I discouraged my children from being lawyers.
Yeah.
It's a great profession. I love solving problems, but it's not a good business. It's charged by the hour, and you fight all day. Everything you do with you, there's this guy on the other side.
Yeah.
It'd be like a surgeon with somebody standing there trying to knock the scalpel out of his hand. And I just resigned from a board this week, and I said, I spent 60 years fighting. I'm just getting tired of fighting.
Yeah.
But and reading documents, for the loopholes of the small print, and you don't know how comforting it is to just read a magazine or a newspaper, because I'm not, peering, looking for the misplaced comma.
Yeah. So, Shelby, what kind of business, lawyer, or life advice would you have for somebody following in your footsteps, or just advice to be successful in general would be great?
I'm glad you asked me that, because my answer is going to surprise you. And I was asked to give a talk to a group of businessmen a year or two ago. And the question was, what is the most non-negotiable, essential ingredient to success? And one would think the stock answer would be, well, you work hard, or ethics. And it's not. To me, and this is going to sound surprising, it's be a nice person. And what I mean by nice is not smiling all the time necessarily, but helpful. And I could give you example over example of, for example, I know a doctor, a hospital doctor, an anesthesiologist, who was the world's nicest guy. He took calls for other doctors, and he was, here, take my car, or can I do this for you? And I did that. And he got caught, unfortunately, using drugs, which is, for a hospital doctor, fatal. I mean, you don't survive that kind of stuff, career-wise, especially if you're an anesthesiologist. And they gave him a second chance. They got him counseling. And I know the person, and he's still there. I know a golf pro at a local club back Midwest. Everybody loved him because he always was giving free advice and always helping out with the swing and this. And he knew every woman's birthday in the club, so if I came in, he said, Mr. Yastrow, your wife's birthday is next Tuesday. Should I put something in your locker, wrap it up a gift? Oh, God, yes. Yeah. Well, he got caught cheating in a golf tournament, in a professional tournament. And they suspended him from the PGA for a while. And he would automatically be fired from other clubs, but he wasn't, because everybody liked him so much. Yeah. And those are two long examples, but the point I'm making is that when you're being judged by a customer or a boss or a partner, which you will be for the rest of your life, if they like you and you're good to do business with, you're going to get the benefit of a doubt if it's a close call. If you're not that way, you're kind of a pain and you're obstreperous, mm-hmm. then the first mistake you make will be the smoking gun that will terminate the relationship.
Wow.
So you're playing for the benefit of the doubt in the close cases. And I remember sitting in the meetings at McDonald's when the top executive team would meet to discuss other vice presidents. What kind of bonus are we going to give them, or stock options? And seldom did you hear, "Oh boy, she really works hard." But what you did hear is everybody likes her. She's very cooperative. She puts in a little extra creativity, and everybody enjoys her, and she helps out. She's good for the team, a team player. Mm-hmm. And those are important characteristics. Because I've come to believe, Tyler, and this sounds crazy, but a guy once told me this when I was a young lawyer. Brains are a dime a dozen. Everybody's smart enough to do what they're doing. You know, I'm not smarter than the next lawyer, but I might have had a little more luck, a little more creativity. People might have liked to work with me more. So I got that little boost somewhere along the way. And if you work hard, you got good work ethics, in my business, you'll win more cases than you'll lose. It's not really a question of how long you've been doing it, or whether you went to Harvard or a city college. It's how you apply yourself to a task. And too often, lawyers are, well, look at all the jokes about lawyers. They're just not popular people. And they don't have to be that way. I always looked for, I knew if I was going to hire a lawyer from an outside firm to work on a case like in South Africa or Brussels or Tokyo, I was going to have to travel with him or her. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't want to be with somebody I didn't like. You know, I mean, it was that simple. And why should I give them the business? Yeah. And it sounds frivolous, but it's not. It's relationships are important. And you can't ever forget that. Getting along with people is the quid pro quo, the sine qua non for anything that follows. You can't have anything without good relationships. Okay, well, thank you both.
Thank you so much for your time, Shelby.
Okay.